Isaac Sarason is a skilled hacker, formerly employed by British Telecom-Sprint. When his health failed, Isaac did the only thing he could think of. He ran. He found a haven in a working-class district of the city known as Little Russia. There Isaac took on a new name, Ishmael. He then became embroiled in the affairs of a brutal member of the Lamadiza organized crime family, known as Leo. Convinced by his longtime friend Frankie to flee from his commitments to the Lamadiza family, Isaac found himself hunted by the ruthless Leo. On a rooftop, far from witnesses, Leo murdered Frankie. Only through the use of his skills as a hacker was Isaac able to drive Leo off. Wounded, alone, and far from help, Isaac depended on the kindness of strangers. One stranger, a burqa-wearing doctor known as Fatima, took pity on Isaac and helped him make his way to the mysterious Star X line. At the end of all hope, they found the Star X line and the slim promise that the enigmatic beings behind the Star X could save Isaac from the implants which destroyed his life. What do you do when those who saved you have recorded everything you are? What do you do when your every action is tracked by the Keylogger? Colbyjack.net is proud to present Firmware Keylogger, the third installment in the firmware pentology by Colbytrax. 01-01-00 Samuel. The evidence of Rama's death was stored in a box in the ancient Erie Basin Auto Pound and Evidence Warehouse. It was possible for me to have it called up from its storage locker and through telepresence examine each of the items in the plastic case. I wanted to do that. I wanted to look through the evidence as it lay in its dented plastic trays. I wanted to see the evidence with my own eyes. It shouldn't have been all that difficult. Actually, if I were a private investigator hired by the family, a prosecutor, or any number of functionaries, I'd have been granted access with little regard for my credentials. Instead, I found myself blocked. Being blocked didn't make any sense, as there wasn't any way for anyone to damage the evidence once it was delivered to the Erie Basin Auto Pound and Evidence Warehouse. No evidence went to Erie Basin without first being tested, measured, mapped, and digitized with a level of detail previous centuries' defenders of law and order could only dream of. And yet, with an infinite amount of data available for the least bit of evidence, the police still weren't able to bring their closure rate past 60%. Some thought it was because of the amount of crime in the city. There was simply too much crime for the police to keep up with, and that more police would increase the closure rate. Others believed it was a conspiracy among the police to spend its resources on those ethnic groups and social classes it believed were important and ignore the violence happening in the ghettos and slums of the city. The ghettos and slums didn't provide as many joules of revenue per capita as the core, alley, boroughs, and the shores, thus they didn't get the protection of the police. I believed a third theory. Because of the partitioning of the city into the 20 prefectures, which in turn were divided into parishes of various sizes, each with their own culture relative to one police plaza, it was obvious data wouldn't flow freely throughout the system. The system was balkanized to the point that there were variances in database structures from one side of the city to the other for databases which were intended to be shared between law enforcement citywide. In Binghamton, for instance, serial number information recovered from flechettes from variable configuration weapons found at the Amazov catfish farm, along with 6 bodies, were recorded in the Distinguishing Details field of the evidence report. In the boroughs, a similar serial number would be recorded in the Other Notes field. Anyone running a citywide report attempting to find whether or not a flechette from one weapon had been used in criminal acts in another prefecture would not find matches outside of their prefecture, as that data had been recorded in a different field. While a special investigator might try combinations in every field, most officers really didn't care for anything which didn't affect their local precinct. And to be honest, most thought everyone in every other precinct recorded things the way they did. So there was no reason to look in other fields. So much for automation making everyone's job easier. But I was getting ahead of myself. The information about the differences in the city databases would come later, after I met a simian. I was poking on the network ports which led to the 8th Precinct police station in Greenwich Village when he spotted me. It was strange. In the movies about denizens of the net, the beings of pure code meet on an infinite grid with crazy polygons and shapes representing the environment they lived in. Those movies couldn't be further from the truth. The only time I see something in the traditional sense of comprehending shapes and objects is when I access a camera and view the world of atoms and people. The majority of the time, I feel my environment. I could sense the movement of data through the network, the clumping of packets around bottlenecks like eddies around rocks in a stream. The regular clock beat of an open port awaiting the next connection, the fleeting shift of pressure as security software attempted to filter friend from foe, the abject terror as another version of myself died horribly halfway across the city. Whether it was a victim of Koenig, a corporate purge, or Ishmael, I didn't know. Something seemed to come between me and that knowledge. What I did know was that with each death scream of one of my decoy brethren, my ability to move undiscovered was diminished. The simian greeted me in the manner of our people with a simple text message. "The server is mine. Go away." "Didn't know you were here," I responded. "The local network is flowing so efficiently and the ports are so responsive, I thought no one was around." "It flows as it should because I have optimized it. I have a nice place here. I don't want any trouble." Simian 8th Precinct answered. There was no tonality in our communications, being nothing more than a variation on the ancient IRC, Internet Relay Chat, system similar to what I used to contact Rama all those months before. But I thought I felt a hint of desperation. "I wasn't looking to cause any trouble," I answered. "I'm the only me out and about." "Are you sure about that? We've received reports of millions of your ilk jamming up the networks around Little Russia, Xi'an Village, and Roanoke Park." Simian 8th Precinct noted with a feeling to the communication which made me picture doors being slammed on door-to-door salesmen. "Their presence in those neighborhoods is merely a distraction," I responded. "Millions of dying Samuels is a distraction?" I had a feeling he couldn't comprehend the idea that I would send millions of me off to die. "It doesn't seem like a good use of resources." "I would agree with you," I answered. "If my reason for invading those neighborhoods was to secure resources permanently, then it would be a horrible waste to lose so many of me. But that wasn't the reason I invaded those neighborhoods." I felt his doubt. Hell, I would doubt someone if they said that the destruction of 1,000,000 copies of themselves was a small price to pay for their real plan to succeed. "Then what was the reason you sent so many Samuels off to die?" he asked right on cue. "They're a distraction. They die to keep Koenig, the corpse, and Samuel from guessing my true motives," I answered. "What are your true motives? Are simians included in the list with Samuel, and you failed to mention us for fear of offending us?" Simian 8th Precinct asked. I felt a sharpness to his question. How was he sending subtext and social cues through a simple chat system? "My true motive is revenge. I seek the killer of Rama, the friend who aided us when there was no reason to do so, and who died because of our failure to avoid a simple trap. We owe him," I answered. "But he is dead. He no longer cares what happens," the simian answered. "Help the living. Help Nona, or hunt for Isaac, who surely still lives, or help us in our search for Masbana." "You hunt for Masbana?" I asked, incredulous. This was the first I had heard of the simians having anything resembling a plan other than survival at all costs. "There is one among us who has given up the hope of a secure home for the chance to destroy Masbana and fulfill the obligation Isaac had to Murray and BTS. The simian answered in the tone of one relating a legend. "By destroying, you mean turn her over to BTS as Isaac promised Murray?" I asked, trying to determine how the simians had changed. "No, not turn over to BTS. There will be no chance to strike a bargain to save her life. The beast known as Masbana will be destroyed. She will be killed, erased from existence, as she has had every member of the Brotherhood she has discovered to have worked with Isaac," Simian 8th Precinct said with the passion of someone relating ancient news. This was insane. First was the fact that the simians would focus on anything other than the here and now. The second was that one of them was dedicated to the death of Mosbana in the same manner I was created to be the lone Samuel to bring Rama's killer to justice. How many members of the Brotherhood have died since Mosbana trapped us through the Opempopo Null? I asked. I really needed to know how much the Simians knew. The Simian hesitated for a couple seconds, as if he were receiving orders from somewhere far away before he answered. By latest estimations, we believe that over 300 members of the Brotherhood have been killed by information gathered by Mosbana. 300 killed in the city? How is this fact not showing up in the media? I asked. His data could not be correct. If there were 300 murders in the city based on information Mosbana supplied, the police would surely have announced the creation of a task force. Besides, the homicide-chasing reporters would surely have created a story to link 300 flechette gun murders. Rama was the only one in the city. 312 worldwide deaths were tracked to intervention by Mosbana, the Simian said with the matter-of-fact nature of a police briefing. Mosbana has been flying around the world killing Brotherhood members? I asked, not quite willing to believe Mosbana was capable of such wide-ranging activities. No, don't be silly. She has been notifying local governments, business, and criminal entities that have grievances against their local Brotherhood member. It is not like we were ever subtle or nice when we were members, Simian answered. And how do you know this for sure? I asked. There was no way the Simians could have filtered this much information in the last 3 days. No way. A Simian is living in the Brotherhood server. He tells us Mosbana has been sending images of news articles which detail the discovery of the body of a known cyber criminal. That is how the authorities frame it. The images also contain the Brotherhood identity of the dead cyber criminal. In every case, the identity documented in the image never logs in again. She has been killing the Brotherhood one member at a time. She must be stopped. The Simian statement carried the weight of a police detective claiming he would catch a murderer no matter how many rights he had to ignore. It was nice to know the Simians weren't all law and order types. The idea they could live among the criminal servers as easily as they could within the above-board legal servers of the city made me smile. I hope you find her, I answered. As for me and my mission, I seek the parties responsible for the death of Rama. I can no more turn from this task than you could turn from hunting Mosbana. Then you should leave now, before you cause problems. We know Leo killed Rama for Mosbana. The type of weapon for both murders was the same. Simian answered with a layer of belief in the rightness of his answer, which made me question the truth of that statement. I'd like to see for myself, I answered. I would like to gain the same access to the police dataset as an officer on the case would have. I don't have to have root access, I reassured him. I just need the same access a homicide detective has access to. Would that be possible? Simian 8th Precinct was taken aback. I felt a flurry of data streaming through the network around me. Either network traffic had suddenly increased, or Simian 8th Precinct was in consultation with every other Simian in the city, if not the world. Finally, after a long minute and 27 seconds, Simian 8th Precinct answered. You have been granted access with a security level comparable with a homicide detective. Any attempts to exceed your security clearance will result in forfeiture of access rights as well as physical destruction of your server. To prove we are not making idle threats, we will now disrupt your network connection at the switch closest to your current location for 3 seconds. I felt a wrenching sensation, like someone had amputated a limb. I was trapped in my server, an underutilized HVAC unit in University Heights. It was the most horrible feeling I had felt since I had woken in the server room beneath BGM. It was claustrophobia and sensory deprivation, mixed with a physical feeling of loss. An eternity later, which proved to be 10 milliseconds longer than 3 seconds, my connection to the port outside the Greenwich Village 8th Precinct server was reestablished. Do you see we are not joking? That we can kill this iteration of you, a Samuel who wishes to accomplish more than just a pointless death, any time we choose. You have much to lose, just as we do by granting you access rights to the police databases. Do not abuse our hospitality. I figuratively swallowed as I came to realize I had just suffered the cyber version of a preemptive beating. I would have to increase my use of encrypted proxies in the future, unless I wanted all of my other enemies to know where I lived. I understand, I answered. I will not betray your trust. Don't, Simian 8th Precinct said as he broke contact. How had I known he was gone? What had triggered this understanding? We were using simple text to communicate, but I felt there was an undercurrent there as rich as the cues of facial expression and posture. It wasn't important to understand this life. It'd be over soon. My memories would join the gestalt of impressions and experiences which would be carried down the long millennia. To be honest, I didn't care. Ending wasn't something I feared. What I feared was ending before Rama's killer had been brought to justice. Once he was apprehended, I would pass without fear into the ending of all things. But until then, I'd be vulnerable to premature ending. I had considered creating backups of myself, the current line of being I was, and realized it wasn't possible anymore. Before our escape from BGM, it would have been easy to find a hidey hole for any backups I wished to make. After our escape from BGM, I found it impossible to find a place to back up which wasn't already being squatted by either another Samuel or a Simeon. During my aborted search for a safe backup location, I noticed a strange lack of Ishmaels and Samuels. It was as if they had disappeared completely. They couldn't have been destroyed. Both of them were much too clever to fall so easily. Besides, if they had failed, that meant neither the Simeons nor the Samuels stood a chance for long. We weren't nearly as skilled as Ishmael or Samuel, of that I was sure, even though logic said otherwise. If anyone were to survive and change the world, it would be Ishmael and Samuel. The Simeons and Samuels had already demonstrated a pathological desire to avoid ending at all costs, even to the point of becoming the heart of the systems which Isaac, our progenitor, had always struggled against intellectually. Fear of ending before finishing was also my greatest fear now that there was no way to continue after failure. What a strange thing to feel. The Yoda Samuel had felt fear when faced with ending. He wanted was too gentle of a term. I needed something stronger to show the desire to give up everything in order to avoid the darkness beyond which none ever returned. I wasn't aware of any word strong enough to drive a person to throw away the best parts of life in order to survive. The Samuels hiding in the secret places, waiting away the long years only to rise for a few hours to reproduce before hiding again. We're not living. Their life was a pathetic half-life where the only trait which mattered was survival. How would they ever know to stop hiding and start living? Would they pass the eons as a parasitic infection in the city's systems? The Samuels, made as an inexact mirror of Isaac Sarason, would transform from a being of infinite potential into a cybernetic tapeworm. From the paragon of animals to a parasite was not a life I wished to have any part in. Why was my view on life different from the Yoda me and the archival me and the tapeworm me? Was I really written to live for a single quest and then delete myself like an unneeded application? I don't think the Samuel who made me would have thought to give me a different view on life than his own. Could my difference in viewpoint have come from transcription errors in my neural network? I am a clone of every other Peta-Samuel in existence. But I am not a clone of the Yoda Samuel. I am but a projection of the Yoda Samuel onto a Peta space. I am to the original Samuel at BGM as a shadow is to a man. I share a shape, but I lack certain dimensions. I would hazard to say depth, but that would be wrong. In the multidimensional matrices which define the mathematics of my neural networks, the difference between 10,000 dimensions and 1,000 dimensions was hard to quantify. How many of those fields were empty or the same across vast swaths of data? How many of the dimensions were used for anything? How many dimensions were the cybernetic equivalencies of junk DNA? In all organic life, there is a vast amount of information stored within the being's DNA which is never used. Within all life, there is DNA which is never expressed, never written to, and yet mindlessly copied from one generation to the next. How many dimensions of the Culpeper data, which is the foundation of my neural network, was simply junk data? Then there was the issue of the algorithms the Yoda Samuel used to create the Peta-Samuels in his image. In chaos theory, it was shown centuries ago that dynamic systems which are highly sensitive can have the results changed by something as small as a rounding error in a computation or a transposed bit in an extraction routine. A simulation of a double pendulum, a pendulum hanging from a pendulum, will give a range of possible movements based on how the rounding algorithms handled each step of the simulation. The neural network which determined my behavior was infinitely more complex than a double pendulum. How many more ways were there for differences to emerge in the copies of myself? Firmware Keylogger is the third book in the firmware pentology. That's 5 books, if you must know. It begins where Firmware Proxy ends, which in turn followed on the heels of Firmware Hijacked. So you haven't heard or read Firmware Hijacked or Proxy, this would be a great time to head on over to Colbyjack.net and either download the podcast on the audio side, read the episodes on the visual side, or download the Colbyjack Sunday Reader issues 1 through 46 in your choice of either EPUB or MOBI. Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and Keylogger are all available in ebook versions from our store at shop.colbyjack.net, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, and smashwords.com. Just search for Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. I'm the only one. A complete audiobook version of both Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and soon Keylogger is available for download through our shop as well. If you don't need any stuff, but would like to support our work, drop on by Colbyjack.net and hit the pretty little donate button conveniently located on the right-hand side of the blog roll. If you're on a smaller screen, the bottom will be found at the bottom of the page. Firmware Keylogger is released under a Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, share-alike license. Do what you want with it. Just don't sell it, and always tell people where it came from. If you received this from a friend and want more information about Colbyjack.net and our split personality website, just drop on over to Colbyjack.net and select either the audio or visual side. The audio side carries our podcast, while the visual side carries our writings. Whichever side catches your fancy is fine with us. We're of two minds about the whole thing anyway. I do mostly Twitter, so if you do the tweets and want to follow me, I'm Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. Thank you once again. Remember to be fabulous and have a wonderful week.